Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to the second year of the Mike's on Mike podcast. Thanks to everyone who's made this first year so much fun. The great guests who've provided very important insight into the issues affecting our community. Of course, my two colleagues and very good friends, Mike Hightower and Mike Tolbert, who have generously shared their experience in politics, and also, especially our friend, Dr. Alan Bliss at the Jacksonville Historical Society, which is located inside the Jacksonville History Center, for his generosity and his support of this podcast. For the three of us, Mike's on Mike is a labor of love, and we feel an important resource for you as we navigate what can only be described as the interesting times in our city, our state, and our nation. And with so much history being made in near real time, we begin our second season with the incomparable Nate Monroe, whose searing commentary in the Times. You like that searing commentary?
Searing, yeah.
I like that. Yeah. It's kind of nice searing commentary. And the Times Union continues to keep us on top of the news that we need to know. Nate is a three-time Mike's on Mike guest, and we have a lot to cover here today. So we'll begin, as usual, with our first question from Mr. Tolbert.
Nate, welcome back to Mike's on Mike. It's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Recently, Mike, a lot of us had a temporary scare because the rumor got out that you were leaving the Times Union. It turns out that's not true. You just have a new assignment. Tell us what your new assignment is and why the change happened.
Yeah, so I am probably better understood now as a columnist for the USA Today network in Florida. So my columns now run in all of the sort of USA Today affiliated papers in Florida. The Times Union is obviously one of them, but you know, the Sarasota Herald Tribune and the Palm Beach Post and Ocala and Gainesville and Pensacola, and on and on. And yeah, I write about statewide topics now. That's kind of a broad umbrella of things. That doesn't just mean I'm going to be writing about the legislature every day. There could be interesting things happening in different corners of the state that catch my attention.
Luckily, they're only in session 2 months out of the year, so we're
right.
Can't do us too much harm. Well,
right.
Maybe they can.
Yeah, 12 months you got to worry about.
Right. And the summer is kind of a notoriously slow time, although it doesn't feel like that in this current climate. So yeah, it's something I'm excited about. I pursued this change. I've been at the Times Union for October. It'll be 11 years, and that's just a long time to be writing about City Hall. I was ready to get something kind of fresh, and a little bit of a new assignment and a new charge. And so it was just kind of time for a bit of a change. And I was really happy there was an opportunity to do that. So pretty simple story.
Well, Nate, welcome back. All right, let's say the right thing. Nobody's going to ever replace you locally. We know that after 11 years. Quite a resume and some unbelievable stories, which I think we're going to talk about shortly. But now with your focus at statewide, who's going to be looking after the foxes in the hen house here locally?
I still like my colleagues. David Bauerlein has been at the paper for a long time. He is like 2 or 3 of me at the paper, and Steve Patterson and Mark Woods are still there. We have, other colleagues covering City Hall, covering business. I still live in Jacksonville, right? So if somebody were to screw up with sufficient stakes involved, I'm sure I could find the time to write about it myself. It really basically just means that I don't want to be writing about like the Downtown Investment Authority anymore on a week-to-week basis. That's something I'm sort of looking forward to not doing.
But what if they do something?
They'd have to do something very big. something more than opening a water fountain in the South Bank to get me to write about it.
Well, of late, that's about all they've done.
I know. I do not anticipate any issues with the DIA popping up on my radar.
No, not at least not in the foreseeable future.
Right.
Yeah. You going to miss that, though?
I mean, I'm sure I will, aspects of it. Thus far, I mean, it's been, a pretty fun change. I did some state stuff with my column before, and I always enjoyed it, and we felt like there was an audience for that. And so this is, really just doing more of that. Doesn't feel like a huge change for me, to be honest.
Well, earlier this month, you wrote that many of the 180 new laws that were passed and signed recently by Governor DeSantis would make Florida, in your opinion, and I loved it, meaner and more dangerous. To quote from the piece for those of you who have not read it yet, Florida is less safe for workers, less culturally rich, more corrupt and less free, a sun-baked place where kids can work long hours and local governments can protect workers from record-setting heat. Cannot, I should say, protect workers from record-setting heat. Where cops get to police their own conduct, where the sea reclaims cities while the state airbrushes climate change out of its statues. From that point of view, are these things that are still important, and are these things that you're going to be covering in your state columns?
Yeah, I mean, those are all topics. What precipitated that column was a lot, not all, but most of the laws the legislature passed and the governor signed took effect a couple of weeks ago. And so that gave rise to a reason to kind of revisit the last legislative session and to kind of recap for people the amount of really, really, really terrible things that these people can do in a very short amount of time. It's actually pretty remarkable. I think that a through line through a lot of that legislation is the legislature has been very keen on eroding what's called home rule, the idea that cities get to govern themselves, that communities get to decide what's best for them. This is a concept that helped make Florida a modern state, but it's something that the governor and the legislature both, I look for opportunities to roll back. The state government has been gradually centralizing more and more power into it. And so that takes the form of something like eliminating the ability of cities to require private employers to have a minimum number of water breaks for employees who work outside. That's not only a very cruel and weird thing to do, it also has the effect of taking autonomy away from a local community. And you see that a lot of these bills. And in every session, the issue of home rule is kind of floating in the background.
And I think many people might say that this is very counterintuitive from what the norm has been as far as the Republican Party is concerned. And yet, obviously, they're looking to do even more in the next year, and already looking for whoever's going to replace DeSantis and see if DeSantis is going to continue, or whoever is going to continue DeSantis's move towards this erosion, if you will, of home rule, especially in education, which I think has probably been the most visible that we've seen.
Yes, I mean, this kind of right-wing era in Florida has given rise to this kind of rhetoric about, we like parental rights as long as you agree with us. We love, government closest to the people is the best, except when we decide it's not. That's very much the kind of attitude here. Some might call it hypocritical.
One place that's evident, Nate, is the way they've gutted ethics laws and taken power away from localities, local governments, to police their own people. And that's got to have an eroding effect all over the state. I know, and as you know very well, Carla Miller got onto the JEA mess like a dog on a bone. If she hadn't been tenacious, no telling where that might have gone, no matter what you did. And I'm wondering, what will go on now in Jacksonville when it comes to ethics violations? Will anything happen? And let me go back and add to that. One of the things I keep thinking about It's members of the city council who run nonprofits who then give themselves money late at night. I mean, that's going to go unchecked, it sounds like.
To be fair, that was going on unchecked beforehand, too.
Yeah.
So
it's only going to be exacerbated then, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a... Yeah,
or the lack of accountability.
Right. I mean, this is not a good development. So, yeah, one of the laws, this actually doesn't take effect until October, although I don't think it functionally matters all that much. So one of these new laws, it doesn't technically eliminate the ability of cities and counties to have local ethics commissions, but it very significantly hamstrings those commissions in terms of what they can investigate and how they can do it. Right now, local commissions have the power, if they choose, to initiate their own investigations. If an ethics director saw something in the newspaper or in a television report about some potentially unethical behavior, they could initiate an investigation. They could start it. This law would end that practice on the local level, and the state ethics commission already cannot do this. But going forward, the only thing that can prompt an ethics investigation is a signed, sworn affidavit from someone who possesses, quote, personal knowledge, end quote, of a potential violation. That those sound like pretty anodyne words, and it doesn't sound like a big change, but it's a significant change. Requiring personal knowledge of a violation is, I mean, I'm not even sure how that's going to work. I mean, as a lot of people have been kind of quoted using a variation of this argument that when a politician commits an ethics violation, they don't like invite somebody in to come watch them do it. You know, often the only person with personal knowledge of a violation is the violator. So, there is a concern that this will effectively end the practice of ethics investigations in the state of Florida.
Well, to pick up on that, then, so what you're really doing is, I would think, they've gutted the possibility for legitimate whistleblowers.
Yes, I mean, this new law also requires complaints to be signed, so there is no more anonymous. An anonymous complaint cannot launch an investigation. And
can't drop a dime, as they used to say.
Right. So your name will become part of the public record eventually if you do file a complaint, and that's not the way it is now. I mean, the Jacksonville Ethics Commission can take in anonymous complaints. They don't, always lead to a lot of investigations, but that option is there. And I'm thinking, Miami and Palm Beach or some of the other sort of significant places that have these commissions that are going to be really changed going forward.
Have you heard anything as to what motivated this change? Is there anything specifically that happened, or any particular legislator that got wrongfully charged or something like that where this bill may have come out of?
I have heard no specific reason for this. I know that various legislators and the governor's office have been frustrated with the state ethics commission at times, but there wasn't as far as I know, there's not a backstory floating around about Danny Burgess was a state senator who proposed these changes to a larger ethics bill. He brought these changes to the floor at the very last minute, so there was not even a lot of debate on any of this. I'm not aware of any kind of specific thing, and all we have are his rationalizations for it, which were frankly not very compelling.
Well, there's certainly not a public outcry.
No,
demanding this happen.
There's not, and I'll add that unfortunately there's also not a public outcry demanding that this be changed back, right? That's been another theme of this era in Florida government. I mean, there are a lot of really sweeping, significant things happening in education, in public employment, and really affecting people's lives, and this stuff is just kind of coming and going, and it doesn't seem like there's nothing that's really galvanizing public attention.
Well, Nate, I have to ask the question. my sense is, like your new assignment, if I look back to when Talbert and I were back doing it, or when I was in the legislature, almost every city had a reporter who was doing state and local. I gotta believe that the decimation of local reporters, or just the media in general, has now allowed no one to bring this up. So you can't really have public outrage if the public doesn't know it until all of a sudden it hits them like a 2x4. So I would imagine that's part of this.
Yeah, I mean, part of what does appeal to me about this is that, I found on a local level here in the city, my column I felt like was at times a good tool to help maybe focus public attention a little bit on issues that I thought might be important. It was kind of a way for me to sort of raise a little flag and say, hey, I think, maybe we should look at this. And I think that's just because, columns are obviously different than news stories. I get to, do my own reporting and like to bring some enterprise to it. But I also get to mix my perspective in, and I think that allows for content that people find a little bit more approachable maybe than a news story. And so I think it helps bring otherwise pretty complicated and uninteresting government issues to people's attention.
Yeah, and I mean,
when you write some of these columns on the state level now, what kind of feedback do you get from the governor's office and from the legislature?
I mean, I think this is a pretty typical experience for a journalist in Florida now. I mean, you don't really hear from the governor's office or these legislators. I mean, I think they don't need the media and don't really care.
I was going to say, I thought that there'd be a number of people in Jacksonville who might be breathing a sigh of relief that you're not going to be on top of the city on a daily basis and feel as though they're going to get... it's going to slide a little bit. And the reporters that you talked about, I mean, with Bauerlein and Patterson and Mark and all the others, they're all great journalists, but they're not analysts. And they're not, well, Mark is a commentator, but not in the same vein as you were. He's more of an observationalist than he is a commentator. And I wonder, as a former member of the traditional media, just who is going to be there that's going to be holding these people accountable. And uncovering those shady things that are going on that people think they can get away with.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the future of local media is going to continue to be a kind of big question mark. I mean, this would be true whether I was still on the city government beat or not.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, there are changes coming in local media, and that's not saying that with like specific knowledge of anything. It's just common sense. And I am somebody that is not an optimist by nature. Probably regular readers can intuit that on their own. But I have lots of concerns about who is going to be watching these people on a local level, and that's true in Jacksonville, and it's true in every local community city in America.
Yeah, I'm sure that's very true, and not just in the print industry either, but obviously we're seeing it in broadcast industry. I mean, with Jim Piggott gone, I think that to me was the biggest loss that we have seen in television journalism in this town in a long time.
Jim, and I will also give credit to Frank Powers, who also retired.
Who was my news
Frank
director when I was on radio.
Yeah, just did a ton behind the scenes that wasn't always visible to people, but was a really big loss for Channel 4.
And Roger Weeder was another one who recently retired. So we've had a lot of that. We've had a lot of that. Two more troubling examples of the idea of accountability, which I wanted to bring up. One of them irks me a little bit, and that is the $60,000 hit to the taxpayers so that we can put up signs to say that this is the free state of Florida. And you'll see that as you're coming in and as you're leaving the free state of Florida. I just don't know how anyone can say that with a straight face.
Yeah, I mean, it's a silly thing to be doing in the first place. I mean, does anyone really... does anyone even really care about these signs? Like, was there a need for this? And
only when it used to say stop for free orange juice as you were coming across the border. Then people cared about those signs.
Yeah, it's like it is like at once both petty and also just kind of ridiculous. I mean, putting that free state of Florida, I mean, it's the governor's like campaign slogan is what it is. And so it's obvious what's going on there, and it's just kind of offensive that anyone's even pretending it's something it's not.
That's true. And of course, there is the referenda that we'll be facing as well, two of them most importantly. One is to legalize recreational marijuana, and the other is to enshrine abortion rights into our state constitution. That's going to be one heck of a fight as we're going towards November.
It is. I mean,
how do you see, what have you heard about that, Nate?
I think, those are two issues that poll very well, that poll above the threshold that they need, 60%, which is, that's a high, think about what do 60% of Americans agree on anymore at all, right? And so it's a high bar, but those two issues do typically poll above that. One interesting thing to keep an eye on there is DeSantis has said that he is going to campaign against them. And I am curious, this kind of post-presidential run lame duck version of DeSantis, if he's going to actually be able to raise meaningful money and actually deploy any kind of substantive campaign against these two initiatives. That's something I'm a bit curious about. I've gotten the sense that he is finding it a little bit harder to raise money. And there also might be an issue that companies and other special interests might be reluctant to give money to causes that are popular, right? Because that's might make you unpopular. So that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
I saw the first TV spot in support of the marijuana initiative this morning. And it was a woman of color who is well into her 60s. And she was talking about the medicinal qualities of marijuana and the freedom of being able to use it as a recreational. But I thought it was an interesting actor to use to roll out a new campaign to legalize marijuana. A lot of people may have thought that they were going to see someone from 1969 in Woodstock who would be coming out with long hair and with a joint hanging out of their mouth. But no, this is a very respected industry. And the other part of that is the whispers you may hear in Tallahassee is the, if you will, the mouths watering over the tax revenue that's going to be generated from this, if in fact it does pass, because other states have seen just a windfall. Illinois, Colorado, all of these states that have legalized recreational pot have seen this as a windfall as far as revenue is concerned. And to take it just from what we have here going on locally, one of the reasons why the mayor's new budget is cut back some is because we're not getting the revenue that we hoped that we would be able to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, marijuana is at this point a matured industry, and there are lots of places we can look at if this passes to implement it. Where have there been lessons learned and how to do it right? The concern I have, and this is getting ahead of our skis a little bit, were that amendment to pass. And this sort of goes in line with what we were talking about earlier, the legislature and parental rights, and you're free until we decide you're not. If voters pass this amendment, I mean, I think a question that has not just occurred to me is, what is the legislature and governor going to do to undermine that constitutional amendment? Are they going to try to, when they have to implement it, are they going to put barriers in place that effectively still keep it illegal or overly burdensome to try to obtain legal marijuana? I mean, I'm curious if there are going to be roadblocks put in place, and this is something that we saw with the felon enfranchisement amendment that voters passed a few years ago. The legislature and the governor essentially blocked it. And so that's even though it's part of the Constitution.
And it's not just Tallahassee. What are they going to do about it on Duval Street?
Right.
I mean, we have a local government who also will have the power to be able to regulate, like they do alcohol now and tobacco now, at least locally, in zones and things of that sort. So it'll be interesting how that whole thing is going to roll out. Speaking of Duval Street, if I can ask, do you see much difference in what we're going to see in the next 12 months with Randy White heading up the city council instead of Ron Salem?
I don't know. I mean, I think Randy and Ron were fairly aligned. I think Randy White is probably one of the more flexible, amenable Republicans that Donna Deegan will have to work with. I think the bench after Ron and Randy becomes a little bit less friendly for her in the coming years. I think there are some more kind of partisan actors on the council who will not be so easy to work with.
And some of that may also depend on what happens in the national election in November, and who ultimately is elected.
Sure.
Because we'll see how long that shirt tails are, number one, and whether or not that MAGA movement continues to come down to our area as well. Mr. Tolbert?
Well, it'll be interesting.
Oh, Mr. Hightower, go ahead.
Say, before Mike Tolbert, because I want to get to that subject, but I was just thinking when he was talking about DeSantis and where he is in his last 2 years, it would be interesting, Mr. Monroe, for you to, this is Hightower's observation, with J.D. Vance being on the ticket, being 38 years old, I'm wondering where that leaves Mr. DeSantis in the next 2 to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some discussion about that already. It leaves him high and dry, maybe. It certainly seems like a choice that would complicate a future run for DeSantis, and that would be true whether Trump wins or loses, right? This was kind of his chance to pick a successor to this movement, and I was a skeptic. I mean, I often get things wrong, but I was very right about DeSantis and was a skeptic of his national prospects a few years ago. He just doesn't have it. He just doesn't have charisma. He doesn't have people skills. He and doesn't, is not an entertainer. And I feel like this moment, at least in the Republican Party, you've got to be a bit of a showman, and he is whatever the opposite of a showman is. I would say that was not a good development for his political future.
And the same might be.
Plus, his bridge burning with Susie Wiles hasn't helped that along at all.
Right. Yes. I would not be shocked if Trump, I do not think Trump will ever forget DeSantis's treachery, and I think that as long as Trump is alive, he will do whatever he can to undermine DeSantis at every turn. I
mean, he holds grudges?
Yeah, this is not me going out on a limb and saying all of this.
You think Marco has got a chance of becoming Secretary of State?
I don't know.
That's what I understand.
Prefer to not
that's
even
what they're
think about
talking
that
about
world.
at this point. At least that's what I'm understanding he's kind of campaigning for.
I'm sure he would love that. I'm sure he would love that.
I am too. Mr.
Well, that would give DeSantis a chance to not appoint himself then to the U.S. Senate.
Great.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So is it my time now?
Yeah. Go ahead.
We're at the good topic.
Good to see you again, Nate.
Yeah, likewise.
Listen, we're taping this on Tuesday, July the 16th, and it'll start airing Monday the 22nd. That's about a week, I think, before Aaron Zahn, our favorite topic, is scheduled to be sentenced. I'm curious as to if you have a prediction on what's going to happen, and what do you think Judge Davis will do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, he gets sentenced on the 30th unless something changes, and it frequently does in federal court. I think the smart money is probably in the 3 to 5 year range of a prison sentence. I think that kind of hits a sweet spot in terms of it's a pretty proportional sentence, I think, for the crimes he was convicted of. I think that Judge Davis will want to make a little bit of a statement with it. He might think that there is a bit of a deterrent effect if someone accused of corruption is going to have to do real time. Judge Davis took senior status in kind of the middle of this case, and he could have handed it off. Like, he didn't have to stay with this case. He kept it because he wanted it. And I think that, it would not be crazy if he viewed this as a fairly important part of the legacy he's going to leave. So I do think that, 3 to 5 kind of seems right, but I'm open-minded to being surprised.
Don't you think?
Judge Davis is Jacksonville through and through, and I suspect that one of the reasons he didn't want to give the case away is because of his roots in Jacksonville, his love for the city. And I also understand that Aaron Zahn has not shown any remorse or any indication that he did anything wrong. And I'd be surprised if that doesn't weigh somehow on Judge Davis with his sentence.
Yeah, there's been absolutely no contrition on Zahn's part whatsoever. That came out. Well, you were there. The difference between he and Wanamaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think part of what will be interesting on the 30th is how does Aaron Zahn present on the 30th? I think that the judge, I'll sort of be a devil's advocate here and say that, Zahn pleaded not guilty to these charges, which, criminal defendants have a right to do that, and they have a right to wage a vigorous defense. He chose a very defiant and kind of curious defense strategy. But I think a judge would be hard pressed to hold that against them, because that was, his right to do that. I think what will matter is, how does he compose himself on the 30th? What kind of presentation does he put on? What did the probation officer find in their pre-sentencing report? These are lengthy, substantive documents. And we do not get to see that report. We will probably hear it referenced, and we might get glimpses of what's in it. But that's the stuff that's going to really determine it. He didn't take the stand in his own defense, which was probably wise. That's a situation where a judge, if you lie on the stand or you perjure yourself, that can be held against you. But I think just the kind of arguments that he raised, I don't think Davis will. I don't think he'll use those things to, justify a prison sentence.
You think he'll go to prison?
Well, one last question.
I think 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, one last question, Nate. You're absolutely uniquely qualified to write a book about this story, this part of our history. When are you going to do that? I've given some thought to like a longer term treatment of the topic. I haven't, the thing, and I've told others this here, and if you live in Jacksonville, you may not believe this, but it would be hard to sell anyone who doesn't live in Jacksonville on a book about Jacksonville's public utility. It can be a bit of a dry topic if you don't live here. There would probably have to be some broader exploration of the utility industry, and that stuff almost makes my eyes glaze over. It's not the easiest thing to write, but I have thought about it. No.
You don't think NextEra would buy up every copy just to give out to their employees?
Just to keep them off the shelves? Yeah, I don't think they will be doing me any favors.
All right.
Well, I totally support Mike Tolbert's thought. There is no one who has helped us get through this more than you, because there's probably nobody who understood what was going on. And candidly, you and I during those times, pardon me, that's Max.
Who's chiming in, by the way? He wants to say hi.
Is that you understood the business. And so when Mike Tolbert, Mike Miller, and I were talking about a possible book, there's very few people who could probably write that story, because you understood the business, you understood the intricacies of a public utility. And then candidly, and of course I'm biased on this one, is the greed and hubris and political shenanigans that went into that. And for one person, and I'll speak for myself with this group, I think that there is a lesson in there for people who are now elected and people who should think about down the road being elected is that if you want to take a chance and try something like that, there are consequences. And I think that there's nobody better sitting in that catbird seat than you, who understood it and can lay out how it happened, why it happened, and how it almost happened. And because of people like Carla Miller and a couple other folks, that it stopped. And if that lesson is not understood and out there, I believe that history will repeat itself. And I think you are the person to at least keep some of these people who, since there is a lack of accountability in the ethics department, I think that there's got to be on the record. Otherwise, people will try it again. That's my thought.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. One thing I will get to do in this new role, and I've done to some extent, is keep an eye on the Public Service Commission and the state's investor-owned utilities, and those are those companies are by many factors larger than JEA and have a huge impact on the lives of Floridians. And that is, getting back to a topic we've touched on, there are fewer reporters in the state than there were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There are fewer eyes on places like the Public Service Commission. And I do hope that in the future I can use the column to, draw some public attention on what's going on there.
It's kind of ironic because as you take a look at the media industry today, obviously there are more media outlets than ever before for people to be able to get news. News that's either accurate or inaccurate, but they can get news. And yet when you think about the number of reporters that are now working for the traditional, media conglomerates and corporations, that number is shrinking. So you've got let's put it horizontally we're growing, but the vertical movement is shrinking. So we're going to have a lot of one-story stores, if you will, rather than large corporations with large staffs that are able to cover every story that really needs to be covered. And we're seeing that in television too, and radio, of course, that happened years ago. We're seeing it in a lot of industries and also institutions. Look at, what is happening to public education in Florida. You have these, formerly strong centralized public school districts are now shrinking. There is a more kind of patchwork system of private schools and charter schools, and the quality of those institutions varies widely. And it's hard to sort of keep an eye on all of them. And that's, it's also just kind of an institutional thing in this country that what were once kind of strong civic institutions are also not so much anymore. Yeah. Well, Nate, we appreciate you being with us here on your third episode of Mike's on Mike. Hope you'll be with us many times. Sure. And now that you're broadening your vision, we now can bring you on to talk about other issues if we feel that it's important to Jacksonville. Sure. To be able to talk about it here as well. So let me suggest that you keep your eye on the PSC. I think you will find a reservoir of opportunities there for somebody like Nate Monroe to pull the curtain back. So just a thought and an observation. There you go. And by the way, thank you all for joining us as we begin year 2 of Mike's on Mike. Our gratitude to Dr. Alan Bliss, of course, the good people at the Jacksonville History Center and the Jacksonville Historical Society. And to paraphrase Alan from last week's show, the most effective leaders of tomorrow will be those who have learned from our shared past. And once again, find Mike's on Mike on your favorite podcast platform, or check it out on our Facebook page, or our website, which is mikesonmike.com, or on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us. And in weeks to come, we're going to be talking about the new budget for the city of Jacksonville. That was just handed over, of course, to the city council on Monday, the day before we're taping this, and they'll be talking about it until it finally goes to a vote sometime in September. We'll be talking about that, hopefully with the mayor and with a few others who have intricate knowledge about the budget and where the money is coming from and where the money is going to be going. Thank you again all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.